So welcome to Palm Sunday. As you know, this is the start of Holy Week, and I want to welcome you. It's the day in which we celebrate the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem before the Passover. And wherever you're watching us, whether you're in a coffee shop, whether you're on a couch at home, whether you're still in bed, or maybe where you are, the sun's starting to set and it's been Palm Sunday all day for you. Hey, we're great that you can be with us. You know, thinking about Palm Sunday and Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem kind of got me thinking about the arrival of celebrities. I mean, a few Sundays ago, it was the Oscars, and I'm not a big movie buff or that, but I presume there was the whole red carpet thing where people are, coming down, they're parading in their latest kit and posing for photographs, and I think sometimes the people cheering on the side. There's this real separation between these incredibly smart people and the pomp and ceremony of red carpets and the crowds who are watching and kind of maybe wishing, hey, I wish I was one of them. But anyway, the other day I was listening to an interview of a political commentator about something that's coming our way in South Africa. Those of you who are South Africans watching, you know about this. But we, like many other countries in the world, I mean, there are so many countries having elections. We're having a general election. And the question that was asked by this political commentator, by the interviewer, they asked them, they said, will the ANC, the African National Congress, get a majority in the new election? And I was really intrigued by his reply because he said, many of the traditional ANC members are disillusioned with the way the government have governed this party, and they don't think there's a viable alternative, and they will probably either not vote or they will vote along traditional lines. Kind of that old slogan, better the devil you know than the one you don't know. Which, of course, may mean that the current party may get the majority. He couldn't really say. And I was thinking about this whole kind of politician celebrity. They play these games, these political games, these sort of power games. They arrive at these occasions in big black SUVs with bodyguards. And I mean, it happens to celebrities as well. And the expecting public are supposed to be impressed by this massive arrival, like, whoa, look who's arrived, and all the pomp and ceremony goes with it. I'm not sure that's how Jesus kind of imagined it, that the day that he would come. I think it was going to be completely different this day, this Palm Sunday. You see, the inhabitants of Jerusalem and Israel, they had been living under Roman occupancy and religious oppression for years. And I reckon both the Romans and the religious leaders had all types of shows of power with pomp and with ceremony. I mean, we know in religious communities they would wear different clothing, and I assume the Romans would parade their power before them. And I wonder how people responded to that, and if there was a sense of skepticism where they responded to it. But Palm Sunday, the way Jesus did this, it was completely different. There was no kind of formal parade. There was no sort of committee that would get together and have a arrival committee because Jesus is coming to Jerusalem. No, they had heard about him, and the people spontaneously began to welcome him. And not surprisingly, he doesn't come with a show of power with bodyguards and a big kind of trumpet blowing. The people gave that to him, but that's not how he arrived. He arrives with humility, as a servant riding on a donkey. I mean, Jesus is a massive person who breaks the norm. And they're willing him on, and they want to coronate him as their king. But Jesus is on track with his mission to bring reconciliation between man and God. And as he approaches Jerusalem, the thing that would happen would be the beginning of the unfolding of the most dramatic events in human history. And people were getting all kind of stirred up for this occasion. Jesus is this ultimate disruptor. Listen to how John, one of the followers of Jesus, describes this day, this Palm Sunday. The next day, the news of Jesus was on the way to Jerusalem, swept through the city. A large crowd of Passover visitors took palm branches and went down the road to meet him. They shouted, "Praise God! Blessing on the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hail to the King of Israel!" In some of the other versions it says, "Hosanna, Hosanna." And we sing those kind of songs. But Jesus found a young donkey and rode on it, fulfilling the prophecy that said, "Don't be afraid, people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming riding on a donkey's colt." What a dramatic moment. And as this moment unfolds, and as I was speaking about this idea of how other celebrities arrive, I realized that, we love status. There's something inside of us that wants us to connect to people of power, to be well known. I remember many years ago, the staff getaway, we had this sort of game where we had to tell a story of something that people would not know about us. And the story I told was the day that I met Bob Dylan. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm already lifting my status because how many people have actually met Bob Dylan? Well, Jesus is different. There's this glorious welcome. Jesus has everything that a king should have, except his mission is different. He has a different message. He's not riding a horse declaring his victory, but he manifests an entrance on a donkey. I want to focus on a small event that takes place on this Palm Sunday. See, Jesus has come into Jerusalem. He has gone into the temple. He's turned the money changers over. And then on that same day, he goes to Bethany, which is like a suburb of, just outside, it's like a suburb of Jerusalem. And we read there this, and it's like I've never read this verse, and I've read it, but I've never kind of actually absorbed what takes place on this day. Let me read on in John 12. It says in verse 20, it says, "There were some Greeks in town who had come up to worship at the feast. They approached Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and they say to him, 'Sir, we want to see Jesus. Can you help us?' Philip went and told Andrew, and Andrew and Philip together told Jesus." So can you see what's going on here? They need an in to get to Jesus, these Greek people, these Greek men, I'm assuming. And Jesus comes and they say, well, I know this guy, Philip, and he knows Andrew, and Andrew and Philip. They get this connection. Anyway, they come to Jesus, and they want to come and see Jesus. And Jesus answered. He says, and I'm reading from the Message version, he says, "Time's up. The time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Listen carefully. Unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never any more than a grain of wheat. But if it is buried, it sprouts and reproduces itself many times over. In the same way, anyone who holds on to life, just as it destroys that life. But if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real and eternal. If any of you wants to serve me, then follow me. Then you'll be where I am, ready to serve at a moment's notice. The Father will honor and reward anyone who serves me." I can't imagine how this conversation unfolded and what things would have said further on. But for me, as I listen to what Jesus says, he talks to these Greeks about seed falling to the ground. And he reminds them, he says, there's nothing valuable in the seed itself. But when it's planted, when it dies, it becomes fruitful. It begins to grow. Jesus says, but if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, life and eternity. I just think it's such a profound thought that Jesus is taking what these guys have come and he's saying to them, he said there's a contradiction, there's a whole different way of living life. You see, for me, it would be the events of this week, this what we call Holy Week, that the true values of Jesus' life would begin to show. That mystery of victory coming through death is the message that Jesus was about to demonstrate. This is and could be the message of Palm Sunday. The message of Palm Sunday could be this idea that the way up is down. Death through difficulty. It brings about resurrection life. It's a contrarian way of thinking. I think that in a way, it's the tough things in our lives that make us appreciate life. Anxiety, fear, loneliness, these aren't just attributes of people, outcast, poor people. These are the very elements that the rich and famous, everybody experiences this idea of anxiety. And more mental health is something that we speak about. And it needs to be one of the major issues that's addressed in our world today. Recently, I got to meet with a friend of mine who is a professional mental health worker in that field. And I was saying to him, what is one of the more prevalent mental health things that you find dealing with in your work? And I was really surprised by his answer. He said, Mark, in the early days of my work, it seemed like there was a lot of people who were suffering from depression. And it's a very real thing and continues to be so. But I feel like at the moment, the whole idea of anxiety is potentially even more prevalent than those who are feeling depressed. I think I say all of this to say that there seems a lot of opportunity for us for a seed to fall in the ground and die. You see, this is the paradox, the mystery that these Greek people were kind of finding out. That what perhaps Jesus is saying, instead of trying to avoid these things, trying to avoid the difficulty, the sadnesses, the inevitability of that the life is a difficult life, that life is hard. It seems that Jesus is saying, we need to embrace it. We need to allow these things to humble us, to do a work in us. You see, coming through the death of the seed, that's where the life comes. That's where a seed germinates and begins to grow, to produce more life. Overcoming stress through acknowledging our need for God, to embrace mystery, and not always have an answer. I mean, the conversation with these Greeks, I think Jesus is raising this idea that there's this gap between information and transformation. This is something I've been kind of thinking a lot about recently. You see, the Greeks had heard about Jesus, and they'd been informed. They knew about him, but they were now wanting to see and to hear for themselves, how do we live this? How do we know about Jesus, and how do we transform it into the way we live? And I think the gap is, and the link between information and transformation is wisdom. That's what Jesus comes and he gives them. He says, you must die if you want to live. And after that, Jesus, he gives this analogy. He says, then you should follow me. So let me try and kind of summarize this and kind of bring it together and share three what I'm calling takeaways from this Palm Sunday. And wherever you are, whatever it is that you're facing, you may be sitting at home and you're thinking to yourself, what's this dude talking about? Death and life and the seed and all this kind of stuff. Well, let me try summarizing. I'm so glad you're still with me. Please, just stay with me till the end. Yeah. And I'd love to know. Why don't you just make a comment in the comment section and say, come on, Mark, get to the meat of the matter. Okay, here it is. That's the meat of the matter. Number one, life is hard. I mean, let's face it. Jesus kind of mentions that. He says a seed dies before it blooms. Life, in a way, was never meant to be easy. Jesus promised hard things. Being a follower of Jesus is hard. So often in life we see bad things happening to good people, and we also see good things happening to bad people. It seems like it's unfair. It's not right. It shouldn't be like that. Prayers don't get answered in the way that we want them to be. I mean, it's happened to me that I've prayed something and it just hasn't happened. And I've said, God, why? We've seen Christian leaders and Christians themselves let us down. And I can go on and on about stuff that makes life hard and makes following Jesus hard. My daughter Jess says this. She says, we can do hard things. And I think that statement, I know for a fact, was born out of her difficulties and some of the stuff that she was struggling about. Because the fact of the matter is, life is hard. But when we find Jesus, and when we come to do it as Jesus says we can do it, we come to the second idea. And that is point number 2. Life is hard, number 1. Number 2, it's easy. You see, when we come to the life of Jesus, we see that Jesus goes through death and he goes through resurrection. And it absolutely is the opposite of what I've just said. But that's it. That's the truth. This faith thing is a paradox. The walk of faith is a paradox. It's not always easy, but it's not always hard. And Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11, he says these words, and these are some of the best words ever. He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry a heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you." If you don't know what a yoke is a means by which you would carry a burden. And he goes on to say, "Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." And he says, "Take my yoke. For my yoke," he says, "is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." He's not saying there won't be any burden. He's not saying that there's a life where it's just bliss and some kind of euphoric experience. Okay. But he is saying that when we walk with him, it can be easy. He's saying that if we take an attitude to life of being humble and gentle, and we make it at the very heart, this becomes workable. What does that look like a little bit? Well, I think first of all, it's about owning our struggles and letting Jesus carry your burden. It's about when we can label our stuff and say, I am sad, or I am full of anxiety, or I am stressed, or I am afraid, or I am whatever it is. It's kind of just giving language to the stuff that's going inside of us and owning our weaknesses and saying things like, I'm trying as hard as I can, I still seem to fail. It's okay. That when we mess up, that Jesus gives us space. You see, the opposite of that is that we hide. We deny, we blame, we accuse others, we become angry. And that whole anger thing and that whole blame thing, it takes energy. And that energy just alienates us and it makes us bitter. Creativity comes when you allow Jesus into your burdens. There's this famous old prayer, it's called the Serenity prayer. I remember when I was a kid, my parents had this picture in the home of a man with his hands folded like this. It was a kind of and it was this prayer, the Serenity prayer. And it says, "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." I love that prayer, and I mean, it's an ancient prayer. I mean, I remember reading that as a little boy. And I see here that Jesus is inviting us to have this connection between information and transformation, and it's wisdom. It's wisdom. And one of the things that I've done over the years to try and reconcile my sadnesses and my sorrows and my things that I'm struggling with is to write it down. To write it down on a piece of paper and just say, this is what I'm going through. And I've also had the opportunity to find people along my journey that I can share these things with. There's a saying, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it here. I don't know it correctly. And if you do know how it's supposed to be said, please write it in the comments, and then they can get it back to me. But a problem or a sadness shared is a problem halved. And what I find out about life is that if I write down my sadnesses and that, then I'll find a way that this is not such a hard thing to do. It's hard. But when I do the hard, it becomes easy because there's this presence of God. And it leads to my third idea around what this conversation between Jesus and the Greeks took place. And that life is rhythmic. In Matthew chapter 11, again in the message, it says like this: "Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you." I love that even reading it, it has a rhythm to it. Now, and I must say this, when it comes to music and rhythm, I have no rhythm. When I was a young man and I was courting my wife, who's a supreme musician and pianist, I decided I wanted to become a drummer. I mean, what 19-year-old, 20-year-old doesn't want to be a drummer? And so I learned drumming. I actually bought a book on how to play the drums. I learned to read drum music. I bought a drum set, and I learned about 4/4, what all the kind of different elements to it. But there was one problem in my drumming. I have no rhythm. And apparently, you need rhythm. Okay, and so anybody who knows my wife, if you ever watch her play the piano, she stamps her foot. And the reason why that was because we were young lovers at the time. And she didn't have the courage to turn to her lover, future husband, and say, Mark, you have no rhythm and you have no right to be on the drums. So she tried to keep me in rhythm by stamping her foot. But I'm not talking about music rhythm here. I'm talking about a rhythm of life. And there's seasons in our lives. There's a rhythm in following Jesus. There are times of quietness and times of rejoicing. There are times of mourning. There are times of praise. There are times of struggle. There are times where it just seems as if God is dead. You see, where grace is apparent in our life is through all these times, all these seasons. And learning to recognize the season of these things is a very powerful way to follow Jesus. We go through a winter season in our faith. It's a season where nothing grows, nothing works. We're finding warmth and comfort, and it's a good time of the season to kind of recalibrate and to reset yourself and to just do some inner work, some searching of the stuff that has gone by. Because the spring is going to come. And in the spring, it's time to sow new seeds, to seek God for some creativity, to perhaps make some changes. And then the summer will come where things go well. It seems like, there's an understanding. You get a release and you're able to kind of really see growth again. And then the autumn comes. And the autumn is again the time of consolidation and it's a preparing. I had a friend who used to really, really emphasize the whole season. He says, if you're trying to have a harvest time in the middle of winter, you're going to fail. But if you will wait the season out, because seasons come and they go, they really do. Part of this whole season thing is timing. And I mean literally timing. So for example, if you need to make a big decision, don't make it at night. If you're having stress, a relational issue with somebody else, don't try to resolve conflict at night. The scientists have taught us that the brain is a muscle, and by the end of the day, it's used. It needs to regenerate itself. It needs to find a way again. And I've often have to say to myself, don't try and solve big problems late at night, but wait for the morning. There's a different time. The energy comes again in the morning and you see your problems from a different perspective because your brain is restored and you're able to figure stuff out. The point I'm trying to make here is that if we want to follow Jesus, we know it's going to be hard and it's going to be easy and it's going to be cyclical. I don't know which one it is. The guys here in the room are kind of helping me out a little bit. They know I need help. But anyway, hey, I hope this Palm Sunday, wherever you are, I hope it's kind of resonating with you. That tomorrow is Monday, and whenever you're watching it, if you are watching it on a Sunday, but you would probably be in Holy Week. And Holy Week leads to just kind of moving towards this time on the weekend. And I don't know how you celebrate Palm Sunday or how you even see Easter, but maybe this week you'll take some time to consider, the hardship of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And then you'll reflect a little bit on those easy moments when it's actually, following Jesus is easy. And that you'll be conscious of the cycles that you're around. So as I finish off this morning, what I want to do, or wherever time it is for you, I want to try and just give you a Palm Sunday blessing. And I want to say this. May you find Holy Week a season to reset. May you stop trying to avoid the hard things, but find the courage and the faith to do hard things. May you be reckless with your love. May it become easy to allow Jesus to help you with the everyday things of life. May you find rhythm in the ups and downs while remaining connected to Jesus. Happy Palm Sunday, happy Holy Week, happy Easter. May you know the goodness and the grace of our God. Thanks for being with us. God bless you.